The cry echoed through the opulent penthouse corridor like a curse no one could break. Elena Ellie Morales paused her meticulous cleaning, the sound piercing her ears for the third time that early morning. She knew this kind of cry. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't sleep. It was the pure desperation of a child, needing something no one there seemed capable of giving. At 28, her hands calloused from years of toil, her impeccable navy blue housekeeper's uniform a second skin, Ellie had learned the art of invisibility. At the Greenwich Grand, the rule was absolute. Staff like her did not meet the guests' eyes. They did not speak unless spoken to, and never, under any circumstances, did they venture into the Thorne penthouse suite without explicit authorization. But the cry persisted. Ellie set her cleaning cloth into the bucket and moved slowly down the hushed corridor. She knew she was risking her job, knew she could be blacklisted, her visa jeopardized. Yet, something stronger than fear propelled her forward. The memory of nights spent cradling her younger siblings while her mother agonized in the hospital washed over her like a tide. She was 15 then, with no idea what to do, yet she had learned through raw necessity. Learned to feel a baby's need simply from the timbre of its cry. When she reached the entrance to the Thorne penthouse suite, the scene was one of contained chaos. Dark-suited security guards blocked the doorway. White-clad nurses shuffled in and out, their faces etched with defeat. And at the heart of it all, through the sliver of an ajar door, she saw him. A tall man, his bespoke designer suit disheveled, held a baby against his chest. His face, usually plastered across Forbes covers and business news segments, was undone. Deep shadows beneath his eyes, jaw clenched, hands trembling. Julian Thorne, scion of a billionaire empire, looked like a man poised on the precipice of despair. The baby in his arms wailed with an intensity that pierced the soul. Ellie took another step. A security guard pivoted instantly, hand going to his radio. But before he could speak, Ellie parted her lips and said, her voice steady, despite her pounding heart, "I can help." The security guard advanced, but then the impossible happened. The baby's cries softened. They didn't cease entirely, but the intensity halved, as if that soft voice had sliced the despair right down the middle. Everyone in the corridor froze. Julian lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto the woman in the navy blue uniform who dared to stand there. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one moved. Then Julian made an almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. The guards retreated. The nurses stepped back, and Ellie, her legs trembling, entered the suite. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers contrasted sharply with the suffocating tension in the air. The baby, around 7 months old, had a face red and wet with tears. His tiny fists were clenched, his body stiff. Ellie recognized it immediately. Colic or poorly managed reflux. She slowly extended her arms. Julian hesitated. Pride, distrust, the fear of entrusting his son to a stranger warred against the absolute despair of a father who hadn't slept in days. Desperation won. He placed the baby in Ellie's arms. She felt the small weight, the feverish warmth, the rapid breathing. She turned the baby onto his side, supporting him against her shoulder in a slightly tilted position. She began to make gentle circular movements on his back, softly humming a wordless melody her mother used to sing. 3 minutes. That was all it took. The crying subsided, faded, until it transformed into spaced sobs. Then, silence. Baby Leo fell asleep against Ellie's shoulder, his breathing finally peaceful. The silence that settled over the penthouse suite was almost sacred. Julian stood still, watching the scene as if witnessing a miracle. The nurses exchanged incredulous glances. One of the counselors present frowned, unsettled. Ellie remained still, not daring to move, feeling the baby's weight, the warmth of his breath against her neck. Julian took a step forward. His voice came out hoarse, loaded with raw emotion. "How did you do that?" Ellie didn't take her eyes off the baby. He just needed to feel safe. Julian Thorne was not a man easily moved. At 34, a widower for only 4 months, he had been trained since childhood to control every expression, every gesture, every word. A billionaire CEO did not show weakness. A leader did not cry. A powerful father did not admit despair. But that dawn, seeing his son finally at peace in the arms of an unknown housekeeper, something inside him cracked. He sank heavily into the velvet armchair, running his hands over his face. The nurses at the penthouse estate had failed. The private doctors found nothing wrong. His entire family had offered useless advice. And now that woman, with simple hands and a serene gaze, had achieved what no one else could. Ellie finally moved, slowly looking for a place to sit without disturbing the baby. One of the security guards brought a chair. She carefully settled, keeping Leo tilted, his tiny hand clutched to the fabric of her uniform. Mr. Sterling, the elder counselor, a man with a gray beard and severe expression, approached Julian. "Sir, this is irregular. She doesn't have the credentials, hasn't undergone a complete background check." "She made my son sleep," Julian's voice cut like a blade. "Something all of you failed to do." Awkward silence. Julian looked at Ellie, really looked. He noticed the discreet dark circles under her brown eyes, her calloused hands, yet delicate as she held Leo. Her upright posture, despite the exhaustion. There was dignity in her done. More dignity than in half the entourage that surrounded him. "What is your name?" "Elena Morales, sir." "Brazilian?" "Yes." "How long have you worked at the hotel?" 3 years. Julian nodded slowly, processing. 3 years invisible, cleaning rooms, emptying trash bins, going unnoticed. And now, in a single night, becoming the most important person in that suite. "Do you have children?" The question caught Ellie by surprise. She shook her head. "No, but I raised my siblings. 4 of them. My mother got sick when I was 15. Something in her voice, in the direct way she spoke, touched Julian. There was no self-pity, just fact. "So you know what it's like to care for someone when everything seems impossible." Ellie met his eyes. "I do." The baby stirred lightly, letting out a sigh. Ellie adjusted his position, murmuring soft words. Leo drifted back to sleep. Julian made a decision. Ellie was temporarily brought on to assist with Leo's nighttime care. A room was prepared for her in the staff quarters of the estate. A salary 3 times higher than her hotel wage was deposited into her account. And, most importantly, she received direct access to the baby's chambers whenever needed. The news spread like wildfire. Within the penthouse estate, whispers began immediately. A housekeeper, no formal training, no influential family. And now she had more proximity to the heir of the Thorne Empire than nurses trained in European universities. Ellie felt the weight of their gazes from the very first day. The other staff avoided her, afraid of being associated with her. The security guards watched her with suspicion. And the estate's medical staff treated her with a professional coldness that bordered on contempt. But the nights continued. Every dawn, when Leo awoke crying, it was Ellie who went to him. She rocked him, sang lullabies, gave him gentle belly massages when he seemed uncomfortable. And the baby, invariably, would calm down. Julian began to appear during those dawns. At first, he merely watched from the doorway, in silence. Then he started to come in, sitting in a distant armchair, watching Ellie work. There was something hypnotic about the scene. The soft glow of the nightlight, the baby in her arms, the quiet lullaby in Portuguese that he didn't understand, but which seemed to carry an ancient peace. One night, he broke the silence. "Why do you do this?" Ellie didn't stop rocking Leo. "Do what? Except coming here, facing everyone's hostility. You could have refused," she thought before answering. "When I was 16, my younger brother had an asthma attack in the middle of the night. We didn't have money for a private hospital. We went to the public one. We waited 6 hours. He almost died in my arms." Julian felt his chest tighten. "I learned that night that when a child needs help, you don't ask if it's convenient. You just help." Silence. Julian rose, approaching slowly. He stood beside the chair where Ellie rocked Leo, looking at his sleeping son. "My wife died during his birth," he said, his voice low. "Complications no one predicted. Leo survived, she didn't." Ellie met his gaze. "I'm so sorry. Everyone says that, but you're the first person who actually seems to feel it." Ellie existed in a limbo between two disparate worlds. By day, she endured the chilly reception of an outsider among the Thorne household staff. By night, she was the sole bringer of tranquility to the Thorne penthouse estate. And Julian, slowly, began to perceive her not merely as an employee, but as an essential presence. He started asking questions about Brazil, about her life before New York, about what it truly felt like to raise siblings without guidance, without funds, without a safety net. And Ellie, initially hesitant, began to open up. There was a raw vulnerability in him, in the way he cradled his own son, fearing he might somehow break him. That disarmed her completely. One afternoon, Julian found her on the penthouse's private terrace. Ellie was seated on a stone bench, her face turned towards the sun. She didn't notice his approach. When he spoke, she startled, rising quickly. "You're Mr. Thorne. Sit." His voice was gentle. "Please." She hesitated, but complied. Julian sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Do you miss Brazil?" The question caught her off guard. "Every single day." "Why don't you go back?" Ellie gazed down at her hands. "Because there, I cannot support my family. Here, I can send money. My siblings are in university now. My mother's treatment is up to date. I miss it, but they need me here." Julian nodded, grasping something few within his privileged circle would ever truly comprehend: the profound weight of duty transcending personal desire. "You are stronger than you imagine." Ellie let out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't feel strong. I feel alone." The brutal honesty of her confession hung heavy in the air, a raw, exposed nerve. Julian turned to her. For the first time, he truly saw her. Not the caregiver, not the employee, but Ellie, a woman of 28 who had sacrificed her own youth for a family she couldn't even touch. A woman carrying the immense weight of the world on her shoulders, yet still finding the profound. Tall, imposing, with eyes that seemed to cut through glass. "We need to talk, now." At 52, a widow of an influential family patriarch, she commanded half of the Thorne family's legacy decisions with an iron fist. Since Julian's wife's death, she had assumed the unofficial role of principal advisor, and she did not tolerate threats to her power. Ellie was a threat. In Julian's private office, Eleanor cut straight to the point. "This woman needs to leave the penthouse." Julian, seated behind the mahogany desk, kept his voice calm. "Ellie is essential for Leo's care." Ellie, Eleanor spat the name like venom, is a Brazilian caregiver with no credentials, no lineage, no purpose beyond cleaning floors. And now she has access to the heir of the Thorn Empire. Do you not see the problem? I see a competent woman doing the job your entire staff failed to do. She is taking advantage of the situation. Based on what? Julian's voice hardened. She has never asked for anything, never put herself in an inappropriate situation. She cares for my son with a dedication no one else in this penthouse has shown. Eleanor crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. People are talking, Julian. They say you spend your nights with her, that there is intimacy. Julian rose, his patience wearing thin. Intimacy. I watch her care for my son. That is all. For now. The silence was thick. Eleanor stepped forward, lowering her tone to something more calculated. You are young, widowed, vulnerable. It is natural to seek comfort. But this woman is not suitable. She never will be. If you need female companionship, there are heiresses of other billionaire dynasties, women of education, of refinement. Enough. The word came out as an order. Ellie stays. End of discussion. Eleanor studied her nephew with cold eyes. You're making a mistake, and when you realize it, it will be too late. She left. Julian remained standing, his hands resting on the desk, breathing deeply. He knew his great-aunt would not give up. He knew this was far from over. That same night, Ellie received the first threat. A note left in her room, unsigned. An unfamiliar script that she needed to translate with an app. Go back to your place before it is too late. She read it 3 times, her hands trembling. She thought about showing it to Julian. Then she decided against it. She did not want to create more problems. She did not want to be seen as weak. She hid the note in a drawer and tried to sleep. But fear now had an address. Ellie began to notice harsher stares, whispers that ceased when she entered rooms, small acts of sabotage, uniforms disappearing, schedules swapped without notice, important information omitted. But she persisted. She continued waking in the early hours. She continued caring for Leo. She continued being the only person able to soothe the baby when his crises came. Until one night, something strange happened. Leo woke crying earlier than usual. Ellie went to the crib, picked him up, but this time he wouldn't settle. He was feverish, his skin too warm, his breathing uneven. She called the on-duty nurse. The woman arrived, checked the baby with haste, and declared it was just a mild cold. She gave him a syrup, scribbled something on a clipboard, and left. But Ellie was not convinced. Something was wrong. She knew what a cold fever felt like. She knew a teething discomfort. This was different. Leo seemed drugged, his movements slow, his cry weak, almost resigned. She picked up the clipboard the nurse had left on the dresser. Medication times, dosages, technical names she didn't fully understand. But one thing caught her eye. The time of the previous syrup was erased. A manual correction made with a different pen. Ellie felt her stomach clench. She spent the next 2 hours awake, watching Leo. The fever wasn't dropping. The baby wasn't improving. And for the first time, she wondered if she was just paranoid or if something was truly wrong. Early in the morning, she sought out Julian. He was in a meeting, but she insisted. One of the assistants, seeing the urgency on her face, allowed her to enter. Julian was at the table with 4 advisors. All of them turned when she entered, disdain evident on their faces. Ellie, not now. The baby has a fever and isn't getting better, and there's something strange in the medication records. Silence. One of the advisors scoffed. Now she's a doctor too? But Julian stood up, ignoring the comment. He left the room with her. In Leo's room, Ellie showed him the clipboard, pointing out the alterations. She showed him the syrup that had been given. She explained the baby's behavior. Julian picked up the phone and made a call. 5 minutes later, a private doctor arrived. He examined Leo, asked questions, checked the medication, and then he looked at Julian with a grave expression. The dosage is wrong. Someone altered the prescription. Julian's blood ran cold. What do you mean altered? It's not a medical error. It's an intentional alteration. Not enough to kill, but enough to cause chronic discomfort. Ellie felt her legs weaken. Someone was intentionally harming Leo. Security cameras were reviewed, medical records audited, staff interrogated, and the deeper they delved, the clearer it became. Someone from within was sabotaging the baby's health. But before the truth came to light, the bombshell dropped in a different way. Eleanor convened an emergency family council meeting. Ellie was summoned to testify, alone, without Julian present. She entered the formal conference room where 12 members of the family council awaited her. Eleanor was at the head of the table, her eyes as cold as ice. "Ms. Morales," she began, her voice formal and cutting. "There are serious accusations against you." Ellie felt her heart race. What accusations? Negligence, medication manipulation, and worse, an attempt to create emotional dependency in the heir to secure her place in the penthouse. The words landed like stones. "That's a lie." Ellie's voice came out firm, despite the fear tightening her chest. "We have witnesses," Eleanor continued, her gaze piercing. "Nurses who saw you tampering with vials, security personnel who reported suspicious behavior. And there's the obvious fact. Since your arrival, the baby's problems have worsened." "That's not true. I discovered someone was altering the medication. I warned." "You, an untrained governess, expect us to believe you discovered something trained doctors missed?" One of the council members chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Ellie looked around. Every face was hostile. Every single one had already decided her fate. "Where is Julian Thorne?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Occupied with company matters," Eleanor replied, a cool smile playing on her lips. "This is a family decision. He will be informed later." A lie, Ellie knew. They were doing this behind his back, twisting the knife in the shadows. "You want to cast me out because I'm not from your world?" Ellie said, her voice trembling but unbroken, a resilient ember within her. "Because I came from the bottom. Because you believe I don't deserve to be near the baby. But I've done nothing but care for him with love." "Love?" Eleanor scoffed, a frosty sound. "You confuse love with opportunism." The room's heavy door burst open. Julian Thorne stormed in like a hurricane, his eyes blazing with a fire that swept through the tense air. "This meeting is over." Eleanor rose, her composure momentarily shaken. "Julian, you have no authority to." "I have authority as Leo's father, and as the future head of this enterprise." He strode to stand beside Ellie, a protective presence. "And I declare, now, before everyone, if you touch Elena Morales, you are touching someone under my personal protection." A ripple of shock passed through the room, silence descending heavy and profound. "You don't know what you're doing," Eleanor whispered, her voice laced with incredulity. "I know exactly." Julian turned to Ellie, his gaze softening. "Are you all right?" She nodded, speechless, her eyes mirroring the raw emotion in his. He surveyed the assembled family, his voice low and perilous, a promise of retribution. "The investigation continues, and when we discover who is truly behind this, there will be consequences." It took 3 days, but the investigation team found it. A nurse, a distant cousin of Eleanor, entering Leo's room at unauthorized times, swapping vials, altering dosages, always when Ellie was not present. When confronted, she broke down, confessed everything. Eleanor had pressured her, promising promotion and silence. The goal was not to kill Leo. That would be too great a scandal. It was to create instability, to make the baby dependent on constant medical care, to keep Eleanor as a central and indispensable figure, and to incriminate Ellie in the process. When Julian received the report, something inside him shattered. The aunt he had respected his entire life, the woman who had helped raise him after his mother's death, she had put his own son at risk for power. He confronted her in private. Eleanor did not deny it, did not apologize. She simply said coldly, "You are blind. This woman will destroy everything we have built. The only person destroying anything here is you." Eleanor Vance was removed from all official duties. The nurse arrested. An official statement confirmed Elena Morales had acted with exemplary integrity and would continue her role with Leo Thorne. But the victory brought no peace. That night, Ellie was alone in her guest apartment when Julian knocked. She opened it, surprised. He'd never come there. "May I come in?" She nodded, stepping aside. Julian entered, closed the door, and stood in the small room center. He looked exhausted, human for the first time in weeks. "I wanted to apologize." Ellie blinked, confused. "Why?" "For everything you went through, for not seeing it sooner, for letting them treat you like a threat when you were only trying to help." "You don't need to apologize. It wasn't your fault." "It was." He took a step forward. "I knew the Thorne family was hostile. I knew you'd face resistance, but I brought you anyway for my convenience, because Leo needed you. I used you." Ellie shook her head. "You gave me a chance. You gave me a voice, more than most ever would." Julian looked at her, truly looked. He saw her silent strength, her unshakable dignity, the kindness that survived despite everything. "I don't want you to leave," he said, low. "I won't. But you should." He smiled sadly. "Easier, safer." Ellie took a step towards him. "I didn't come this far looking for easy." The silence between them vibrated with something unspoken. Julian raised his hand, hesitantly, lightly touching her face. "You are extraordinary." Ellie felt her heart quicken. "I'm just me." "No, you are so much more." Ellie continued to care for Leo. But now, Julian was always present, no longer a distant observer, but a father learning. He watched her cradle his son, give massages, sing Brazilian lullabies. He began to imitate. Gradually, Leo began to smile when he saw his father. Gradually, Julian discovered he could be a father without fear. And gradually, something bloomed between him and Ellie that neither dared to name. One afternoon, Leo was crawling across the rug when it happened. He clutched Ellie's ankle, pulling himself up. He wobbled, and then, looking up with enormous eyes, he babbled, "Na, dia." Ellie froze. Julian, who was sitting nearby, slowly stood. Leo repeated, clearer, "Nadia." It was the closest a 10-month-old baby could get to Ellie. Ellie knelt, taking the baby, her eyes welling up. Julian approached, touching her shoulder. "He chose you." Ellie looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want to steal anyone's place. I don't want him to forget his mother." "You're not stealing anything." Julian knelt beside her. "You're giving him something he needed, something I needed." He touched her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. "I know this is complicated. I know my world is difficult, but I can no longer imagine my life without you in it." Ellie closed her eyes, her voice a whisper. "I'm just a governess. You're a billionaire CEO. This will never work." "You are not just anything." His voice was firm. "You are the woman who saved my son. who taught me how to be a father, who had courage when I only had fear. He leaned his forehead against hers. And if you give me time, I will prove that we are possible. Ellie opened her eyes, meeting his. Leo, between them, giggled, clapping his hands awkwardly. She smiled through her tears. Time, I have. Julian smiled too. And in that moment, with their son between them and an uncertain future ahead, something old healed. Something new began. It wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance. There would be judgment. But for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. And sometimes, Ellie thought that was everything. Julian kissed her, soft, respectful, laden with promise. And when they pulled apart, Leo clapped again, as if he knew, as if he had always known. End.